Welcome to the CondoVulturesTV podcast with your host, Peter Zalewski, a Miami real estate broker, Wall Street consultant, and expert witness. This podcast is focused on identifying real estate buying opportunities in the South Florida condo market of Miami-Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach counties. The CondoVulturesTV podcast is not authorized by the South Florida real estate industry and will most likely annoy many of the region's talking heads. This podcast will feature straight talk and salty language that could be offensive to some. Please remember that past investment success does not determine future gains, especially in South Florida's volatile condo market. For more information, please visit CondoVultures.com.
Welcome to Miami Reporters Roundtable. I'm your host, Peter Zalewski from Condo Vultures. If you're tuning into this podcast, you're going to hear a conversation by current and former journalists talking about some of the biggest stories that occurred within the last week that are impacting the South Florida real estate market as well as the local economy. What we're going to do is we're going to discuss 6 stories that I handpicked. I sent them off to the journalists and I asked them basically to give a critical eye as to what the stories are about and what's sort of going on behind the scenes. The purpose is to help you, the audience, understand some of the fluff that's out there in the marketplace. Fortunately, we have some people who are in the public relations world, so they're going to be able to give us both sides, what is the spin as well as what is sort of the reality behind the scenes. So if you have any questions or if you want to comment for us, send an email to inquiry@CondoVultures.com, INQUIRY @CondoVultures.com. Also tell you too, if you're listening to this podcast in a traditional audio format, you can check us out on video. Go to any platform that permits for video, such as Spotify. If you want to check us out on YouTube, the handle is CondoVulturesTV. That's CondoVulturesTV. So that being said, let me go ahead and start to introduce our panel. We're going to start off with a gentleman who is a journalist for 25 years. Right now, he has his own public relations and marketing firm called Gruss Communication. That's John Gruss. What's going on, John?
Hey, Peter. Glad to be back on the show. Thank you, Oscar.
It's great to have you back. Thank you for flying across the country from Las Vegas back to Miami in order to do the podcast. It's much appreciated.
It's happy to be here.
Quick question. What was the tourism like out in Vegas and how does it compare to South Florida tourism that you've seen?
Well, it was actually pretty busy. I was surprised. Vegas is always a happening place. So, it was pretty busy. Flights were full. Fortunately, I avoided the, heavy rains that we had here, that blocked some of our airports. And, so flights were uneventful, but jam-packed as usual.
Fantastic. Anyone who wants to get a hold of Jean, you can go to his website, GrussPR.com. That's GRUSSPR.com. Let me also introduce another one of our journalists participating in this particular podcast. Gentleman who's been a journalist for over 20 years. Right now, he is a media consultant. He likes to call himself an expert. We'll see about that. Anyways, it's Oscar Musibay. Oscar, if anybody wants to reach him, they can get him at Musibay, Musibay @gmail.com. What's going on, Mr. Musibay?
Just hanging out, man. I'm very interested in this panel. I think it's going to be exciting, engrossing. Anything ending in ing, I think it's going to be fantastic.
Fantastic. I can tell how this podcast is going to go. And our third journalist for the podcast is a gentleman who is a white-collar crime reporter. He also wrote business stories and he did restaurant reviews. Right now, he's a public relations and marketing consultant. His name is John Fakler. If anyone wants to get a hold of John, they can get him at Fakler@consultant.com, FAKLER @consultant, which is singular.com. What's going on, Mr. Fakler?
Hey, Peter, being very excited to be back this week. To borrow a term from our colleague Jean, these are very fantastical stories that you've sent. So I'm looking forward to talking about them.
That's fantastic. Before we get ahead of ourselves, Mr. Fakler, you made a proclamation about 5 weeks ago talking about how the New York Jets, which is the main rival for the Miami Dolphins NFL football team, you made a proclamation. You wore a Jets hat. You told all Miami Dolphins fan, which is where we're recording this podcast, that they were in trouble because the Jets had this soon-to-be Hall of Fame quarterback. I wanted to get a status update. Has Aaron Rodgers, this quarterback from Green Bay Packers, has he been traded to the New York Jets yet, as you had proclaimed in our podcast 5 weeks ago?
No, he has not been traded yet, as you like to bring up every week. But The rumor mill is that he will be signed before the draft, which begins in 9 days, because otherwise the Packers are going to be stuck without any draft choices. So they're looking for some movement before the draft, so it could be within the next week or so.
Okay, so next week when we do the podcast, we'll be sure to check in with you
I'm
about
sure
the
you
details
will.
of that transaction.
You love reminding me.
Fantastic. Now that we've gone ahead and introduced everybody, we're going to take a commercial break. Other side of the break, we're going to get into our first 3 stories.
It's a simple formula, and it works. Buy low, sell high. We're Condo Vultures, and when it comes to your real estate, we help you buy low. At Condo Vultures, we represent the buyer, and now's the time to buy. Log on to CondoVultures.com for more information. CondoVultures.com. And remember, before you sell high, you have to buy low. Featured in the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, 60 Minutes, and Time Magazine. Condo Vultures Realty, a licensed Florida real estate brokerage capitalizing on the condo correction since 2006.
Welcome back to the Miami Reporters Roundtable. I'm your host, Peter Zalewski from Condo Vultures. We're going to be discussing 6 stories, and in this segment, it'll be the first 3 stories that I handpicked to send them off to the journalist, ask them to give it a read, and ultimately give us their assessment as to what's really going on in this story, cut through some of the fluff and the hyperbole that's out there, and help you, the audience, understand really what the takeaway is from this particular story. We're going to start off with John Gruss with the first story. John, this is a story that is coming from the real deal. I'm going to read the headline. I'll read the first couple graphs. Then I'll ask you to just sort of provide some context for the audience, if you will. Headline, air quotes, no dumb buyers. South Florida homes selling at discount. Subhead, most luxe single-family homes that sold in Miami Beach recently traded below the asking price. First couple graphs, Mr. Gruss. In March, a hidden buyer paid $15.3 million for a waterfront home in Surfside, which is a suburb or a city located just north of Miami Beach, setting a record for the town. A month earlier, another anonymous buyer spent $21 million on a waterfront estate in West Palm Beach, which is in Palm Beach County, very close to where the former president Donald Trump has his Mar-a-Lago. Also marking a record for the city. About the same time, a concrete company CEO sold his mansion in Miami's Bay Point for $38.5 million, more than double the previous record for the waterfront neighborhood. And at the very top of the market in March, cosmetics billionaire William Lauder paid $155 million for Rush Limbaugh's oceanfront compound in Palm Beach County, which was quietly marketed for up to $175 million. Though not a record, the deal marked the second highest price for a Florida home sale ever. It's clear that buyers are still paying never-before-seen prices for residential properties, but a slowdown in overall sales is leading to more price cuts across the board, brokers say. In February, sales fell more than 30% in Miami-Dade County, Broward County, and Palm Beach counties on a year-over-year basis, according to the Miami Realtors Association. John, first of all, are buyers dumb? Is that the default, which this story is sort of leading to? And second of all, what's going on with pricing from everything you saw in this story? And by the way, anybody who's paying attention to the podcast, if you go into the description, we're going to go ahead and provide a link so you can read the story on your own.
Well, to be honest, Peter, I'm sort of surprised that it's taken this long for the market to start to turn. And another thing that surprises me a little bit is that they're talking about the luxury market, which generally tends to be less affected by interest rates than housing for working stiffs like us. So where every point of interest rate increase really takes away affordability. So I'm a little bit surprised on both these things. I would have expected the market to turn a lot sooner. I mean, when they say there are no dumb buyers, obviously, I don't know about that, but but as a group, I think that obviously people are starting to realize that prices can't just keep going to the moon. And the market is turning, and certainly even very, very wealthy people for whom money seems to be no object, even they don't want to be, stuck paying the at the peak of the market. They don't want to be caught at the peak of the market. So those are my 2 observations on this story.
Interesting. And I will point out to the audience, in the state of Florida, and I have a real estate license. I have a broker license. I've been licensed since the first half of the 90s. Basically, in the state of Florida, when you are working with a realtor, unless you have some sort of exclusivity, chances are that broker is representing the transaction and not you, the individual buyer per se. So that's something to keep in mind. But John, let me read a quote from you real quick, and I want to get your feedback. This is coming from Michael Pappas. He is he's the CEO of the Kai's Group, which is one of the oldest real estate brokerages, possibly in the state of Florida, but definitely in South Florida. And here's his quote. There's no question that many sellers had expectations of the COVID boom and price increases, Mr. Pappas said. That now is not there. Reality is making them make the adjustment to the current market pricing. John, it sounds like Mr. Pappas, who's been around the real estate game for quite some time, his firms have been around forever. That sounds like an admission that prices are too damn high. And some of the sellers, if they do want to sell their property, they're basically going to have to reduce it because at the end of the day, this is not gold. This is simply real estate.
Yeah, but for people like Pappas, I mean, they don't care what prices are really. What they care are transactions. They want transactions. If there are no transactions because buyers and sellers are this far apart, then, he doesn't get any business. I mean, when sales fall 30% year over year, that means his business is down, or basically real estate agents' business is down 30%. So they want buyers and sellers to come together. And, his objective is to make sure that sellers are not thinking like they've got this crazy lottery ticket, and then they've got to get buyers to pay up a little still, so, the closer they bring those together to generate transactions, the better it is for their business. So I always sort of take what brokers say with a sort of a grain of salt, because, they don't really care what the price is as long as there's a transaction. That's how they make their money, on a commission.
Great point, John. And for the audience, you should know, generally speaking, the rule of thumb is commission is going to be about 6% of the transaction price, split by the buy side as well as the sell side, just to give you some context. So story number 2, Oscar Musibay, we're going to go to you. We heard a lot during COVID that people from New York, people from California were all moving to Florida. It was a state where you didn't have to wear a mask. Spring break crowds came here in record numbers. The supply chain issue became really a big deal here because so many, pronounced. The supply chain became pronounced. There's all this talk about how South Florida is really booming and how this was the place to be. And as a result, real estate prices are going up. So that's the context, Oscar. Let me read you the headline and the first couple graphs from the story from Axios. Here we go. Headline: Miami-Dade's population dropped slightly while Florida's grew. First couple graphs, Florida population has been growing, but Miami-Dade County shrank by nearly 1% between 2020 and 2022, according to the U.S. Census Bureau data. What happened? Between 2020 and 2022, county's population dropped by almost 22,000 people. Yes, but Miami-Dade was just one of 9 Florida counties that lost people. The rest gained. And the biggest drop by percentages happened in Lafayette County, which lost 5.2% of its population during the times, or 428 people. So that's kind of an outlier. Meanwhile, the fastest growing county in Florida was Sumter County, where part of the Villages is located. Villages is that community everybody sort of knows about. It's kind of a retiree utopia. It jumped more than 11%. Zoom in, South Florida as a whole still grew, and Broward County population rose by 0.2%, and in Palm Beach County it grew by 1.6%. So, Oscar, help us square this. How is Miami booming? How are prices going up if the population actually decreased?
So I think there's a few things that are happening here that are important to consider. And part of it is data that you were pointing to in the last story, because there's still record sales going on. And even if prices shrink, they're still higher than they were 2 years ago. So the difference between what the asking price was versus sale price is still significant, right? I mean, I'm sorry, the sale price is still significant, even if they dropped a little bit from their asking price. So I think that what's important here is to understand that, yes, there is a significant migration of people from all parts of the country into Miami, specifically the Northeast. And I know because I see it on the road all the time. License plates from everywhere, Michigan, Pennsylvania, everywhere, right? New York. And that is continuing. And the reason it's continuing is because our property values are high to us, but to them, they're at a discount based on where they live, right? So there's a lot of people that are interested in coming here. Now, the census data indicates that we've shrunk. And what's happening at the same time is that people are moving north to get better pricing on housing and maybe better schools, maybe, better amenities, places that are not overdeveloped where traffic is less. So that's why you're seeing that Broward and Palm Beach are seeing increases while we're seeing decreases. So it may be that also the fact that businesses are now asking their employees or maybe telling their employees that they have to come into the offices is affecting our population in Miami-Dade. So everybody moved here thinking, oh man, this virtual office is going to be forever. And I moved from wherever I was, New York or California or whatever, moved here thinking I would be able to have my home office forever. And now Apple and everybody else is saying, guess what? You're going to have to come into the office. So that's probably part of what's affecting this out migration. And regardless of that, there's still enough new housing being built. And that's because of demand. Now, Peter, I know that you keep track of this. What is the amount of inventory that's in the market right now? Is it 6 months, 9 months? How much do we have?
Ballpark in the Tri-County, South Florida area, I'd say it's equilibrium, which is roughly 6 months, give or take, depending on which market you're looking at. However, I will tell you on the data side, if you look at transactions and how long they took in 2022 versus how long they're taking now, right now, places are on the market twice as long as what a transaction took a year ago. So you are seeing a dramatic slowdown in terms of the sales pace.
But what I'm hearing still anecdotally is that there's still a lot of cash on the table, that people are coming in and outbidding each other. And maybe it's certain neighborhoods that are being affected more than others, where, locals who are looking to move up are facing this kind of situation, and they still have to outbid the other person to be able to close on the house, to sign the contract. So it feels like there's a lot of nuance in here that we're exactly picking up on, that the data isn't reflecting clearly, because anecdotally, I'm hearing that there's still a lot of demand for quality housing in this market.
Interesting. Oscar, I won't ask you to say this, but I'm going to say, is it, and this is rhetorical, is it possible that this is a snow job by the real estate industry to make people think there's less supply and there's less product out there, therefore to justify the pricing versus what the actual Census Bureau data is suggesting? So I'm not going to ask you to answer that because you do work on the public relations side. I'm just throwing the concept out there that possibly some of the marketing is much better than maybe some of the reality on the
You're
ground.
saying that the numbers are reflecting the state of the market, meaning that there is a drop.
Well,
that's what you're saying.
Well, what I'm saying, many people think that the real estate data, it all revolves around the MLS. The MLS, the multiple listing service, is simply a database for people who have a real estate license. They pay $1,000. They join a club called the Realtor Association. Then they put all this information in this database. Right. Zillow taps into it. Others tap into it. Doesn't mean it's all the transactions that are out there. It's those transactions where commissions being offered. So a lot of times there is what's called shadow inventory. There's other stuff going on that never actually makes it in the MLS because nobody wants to pay that particular commission. So I don't see how the Census Bureau data can suggest the community has decreased, but yet the prices are going up, other than the possibility that people are buying second homes or properties for Airbnb or home sharing type of programs. Otherwise, it just doesn't make sense, because supposedly there's this big housing shortage. So is a corporation buying it? Is a second home buyer purchasing it? Who's who's consuming all this, and then are they going to have the wherewithal to ride through higher prices, which means higher property taxes as well as a higher insurance bill. So
Let me ask you a question.
that's something we can.
Is one of the
Please.
stories you sent us, Blackstone creating a new fund, is that one of those
Yep.
stories?
That is one of our
And
stories.
who was the person who was responsible for that story? Okay.
I am.
So maybe we go into that because maybe, like you said, maybe it is a fund. I mean, that fund is bigger than the last one that Blackstone. So maybe we go into that next because it leads right
Okay.
into it.
Well, here's the thing though. We're going to pick that up in the second half. That's going to be sort of what we focus on in the second half. But that's great foreshadowing for what we're doing. So we'll leave that up there. If anybody has a comment, send an email to inquiry@CondoVultures.com. We'll read it on the air. INQUIRY@CondoVultures.com. Do you think that maybe the real estate industry is hoodwinking buyers, or is it second home buyers who are buying this product, even though the population is decreasing? Or do you think it's like Oscar's saying, where there's a lot of stuff that's sort of going on and it's still a rah, bullish type of atmosphere? So send us an email and we'll discuss it.
I'm not saying that it's rah, rah, rah. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying
Okay. All right.
is that it may be in pockets so that there's still a lot of demand in certain pockets. Like maybe it's below 25 million or below 10 million or below 5 million, but higher than 500,000, where there's a lot of activity because there are a lot of, I'm just thinking out loud, right? There are a lot of professionals who are relocating here and they make a lot of money. They're in tech or whatever it is. We're seeing these stories. I have no idea. What I'm suggesting is we're seeing a lot of stories about people relocating here. Some of them are financial CEOs. Some of them are tech CEOs. And the question is, where are they living and how are they impacting the real estate market? And how does that impact everything else? Now, we know for a fact that in the boom times, the numbers aren't reflective of the real market. And the reason is because condominium sellers are, implementing their friends and family list, which sells out a building before it's even on the market, So is that an accurate representation of the market? Does that not fuel faster sales in other buildings? Of course. So the data is saying one thing. Anecdotally, we're hearing something else. And the last time I was on here, which is, 3 months ago, there was a story about the number of brokers shrinking, right? So clearly something is happening. Something is happening that the market is changing. And the question is, can we make a blanket statement that says the market is slowing down, or is it slowing down in certain parts? Because it may be that some people have given up on buying because it's too expensive. So they're focusing on renting. So does that mean that there's less demand for houses? Maybe, but only at a certain level. Maybe it's from 500,000 and below, right?
Sure.
I
But I will say the other side of the trade is, does it mean there's widespread speculation because the number of sales has gone up while the number of people has gone down? So that would, especially if an investor has an adjustable rate mortgage, when they were buying in interest rates, the federal funds rate was 0 and now it's 5 and probably pushing north of 5. What kind of adjustment and what kind of, religious moment are these people going to have once the interest rate starts to be reflected in what their mortgages are? So anyways, let's go ahead. Let's move on to our next story. And this is something that I would encourage the audience to go ahead and send an email, inquiry@CondoVulturesTV. We'll pick it up. We want to hear from you. Am I full of shit? Is Oscar full of shit?
What?
What is the reality? That's what this conversation's all about.
That's right.
Cutting through the fluff.
Yes.
All right. So that being said, we're going to go to John Fakler with story number 3. John, this story is coming out of Miami today. It's a piece where I'm going to read you the headline. I'll read you the first couple graphs, and then I'm going to ask you to comment on it. Headline: Miami finds mogul for renting out his mansion for parties. First couple graphs: Miami is slapping a red light camera mogul, guy named John Pedrosa, with a 6-figure fine after he racked up numerous violations for illegally renting out his Belmead Island waterfront estate for pandemic-era parties. The Miami City Commission unanimously voted last week to charge Mr. Pedrosa nearly $230,000 for short-term rental violations at its 8,000 square foot mansion that overlooks Biscayne Bay. Commissioners were not willing to negotiate the price, as the attorney representing Mr. Pedrosa asked and said he would serve as an example to deter future bad actors. Now, Mr. Fakler, before you answer that question, let me just sort of throw out there that this request for a reduction in a fine, this is something that was put out and made available by the city attorney of Miami's husband, who was buying some properties. Now, a little bit different circumstance. He was buying properties that were in a guardianship program. They had all kinds of fines against them. He then went to the city of Miami, asked them to reduce, if not eliminate the fines, and they should share no problem. So just sort of keep that in mind, Mr. Fakler, as you're answering this question. Is a $230,000 fine adequate? And is this an apples and apples comparison where some fines are waived and other fines are not because the gentleman is a billionaire?
Well, just a little background here. There's a reason why they're holding firm on getting this amount of money.
The city of Miami.
Yes, because this is a repeat offender. There were first two violations. There was no fine, but then there was a third violation, and they just decided, okay, we're going to hammer this down. We're going to make an example of them. I think there might have been a slight reduction from 250 to 230 something thousand for some reason. But Commissioner Joe Carollo is actually quoted in the story as saying that they wanted to make an example of them, so this does not happen in the future. Now, this particular zone, this zoning is strictly for long-term rentals. You can't do a short-term rental there. So Airbnb, other similar companies cannot operate there. Now, this guy was renting, Pedrosa, I believe the guy's name was renting on Airbnb for $3,500 a night. I mean, and the background story is the neighbors were up in arms because the guy, I mean, there was drag racing in the neighborhood. They were renting out video shoots for commercials. They had buses. I'm sorry, I had to write this down. There was so much stuff here. Buses stopping and dropping people off for the weekend. And then, of course, there was a Bengal tiger at one of these. Interestingly enough, yeah, we've heard about the Russians doing that with the tigers, but there was a Bengal tiger, and believe it or not, the Florida Wildlife Commission said they were legal because they had a license for an exhibition. So, of all the things, that was actually legal to have a Bengal tiger there. So, you've got all this going on. I couldn't help but to look into this guy Pedrosa a little bit. I put my investigative journalism hat on. The guy goes back. There was a New York Post story from 2015. The guy, as we mentioned, he was an entrepreneur, came up with this red light cameras. The big contract he got was in New York City, $120 million. He had another contract pending for Long Island. But apparently this whole concept did not go over well with the Manhattanites. So he got a lot of pushback. There was a lot of investigations. Apparently the guy has multiple moving violations at the time, 2015. He's got a red light camera thing, was supposed to keep everybody in check. He's got he's got tax issues according to the Post. Again, don't know if they were resolved. He had moving violations. He had some sort of a big fight with his stepson over the mother's inheritance. So the guy's got, this laundry list of issues. I'm not saying they haven't been resolved. This is 2015. But the best part of the story was, he had a Facebook page that was devoted strictly to his party in the Hamptons. Had a red Lamborghini. Apparently, in this Facebook posting, he had scantily clad women, according to the Post, dancing around a stripper pole. I'm just saying, this is a little bit of background about the guy. He's got a little bit of a history. So I just wanted to mention that. So, we'll see how this plays out because that is still pending as far as the fine, the 200,000 plus fine.
Is it fair to have this billionaire pay the entire fine when other people, same type of idea, asking for a reduction or elimination of a fine while other people are getting waivers?
Well, let's keep in mind how much he was getting a night. So if there's some sort of a sliding scale about how much they can be fined, and maybe they're looking at the certain amount of rentals they had over a certain period of time and basing that scale on
Interesting.
how much they were renting property. So that's
Interesting.
maybe that's the way to go in the future. I mean, one thing for sure. I mean, Joe Carollo is he's really battening down this whole issue, which has been an issue in the past. I mean, we've talked. They've had other issues, I believe, in Miami, right, Peter, as far as Airbnb and not being in certain neighborhoods and being allowed in others. But we'll see how this plays out.
Yeah, interesting. And I will say Miami Beach has been the one that's been proactive, much more proactive than the city of Miami. So this is kind of unique. So anyways, let's go ahead. We'll take a commercial break. Other side of the break, we're going to get in our next 3 stories. This is Peter Zalewski of the Condo Vultures podcast. I hope you're enjoying the podcast. And I wanted to alert you that if you have a property that you're looking to sell in the Tri-County, South Florida area, I would encourage you to reach out to Jenny Cortez, a licensed real estate broker with CVRRealty.com. She's my partner. She's been in the business for north of 15 years. More importantly, she knows the market. She knows how to get a deal done. And she also realizes that it's more important to get a price that you can accept and sell the property rather than to hold firm on some price that's never going to be achieved and ultimately languish on the market. So if you're looking to do a deal that you want a skilled expert who can help you sell a property, reach out to Jenny Cortez at 305-865-5859, 305-865-5859, or visit her website, CVRRealty.com. Back to Miami Reporters Roundtable. I'm your host, Peter Zalewski from Condo Vultures. We're going to discuss 3 more stories that I handpicked, send them off to the journalists, ask them to give us some perspective. The concept is to try to understand the significance of the story and cut through maybe some of the fluff and give you, the audience, an idea what might really be going on behind the scenes. So, John, Gruss, we're going to go to you with story number 4. This was referenced in the previous segment. This is a piece coming out of Reuters news agency. The headline, Blackstone raises $30.4 billion for latest real estate fund. Anybody doesn't know what the real estate fund is? Basically a bunch of individuals who are qualified investors. They go ahead, they invest in a fund, and then the fund has the right to go around and buy stuff, preferably at a discount, and try to get a return based on changing market conditions. So here we go. First couple graphs, Sean, then I'll ask you to comment. Blackstone said on Tuesday it had raised $30.4 billion for its latest global real estate fund as the private equity behemoth looks to double down on the industry. The fund, called Blackstone Realty Partners X, is 48% bigger than the asset management giant's previous real estate fund, which was closed in 2019. Blackstone's been focusing its portfolio on logistics, rental housing, hospitality, lab office, and data centers, shifting away from the assets like traditional offices and malls that are facing headwinds from a post-pandemic adoption of flexible work and a surge in e-commerce. John, what do you make of the fact that Blackstone thinks that there's going to be plenty of stuff to buy, and Lord knows they like a deal?
Yeah, I mean, obviously they're starting a fund focused on areas that they think they can add value. I mean, that's the private equity playbook, right? You buy distressed assets, you turn it around, and you sell it at a profit. So, I mean, it absolutely makes sense. What's interesting is that Blackstone actually had a flood of redemptions in recent months from their previous funds. And they had to actually limit redemptions because obviously the assets that they're holding are real estate, so they're not liquid. So they have to limit redemptions. They can only limit a certain amount at any given month. But it was kind of interesting that they have raised this new fund, and presumably the previous fund, if it was focused on perhaps some other asset classes, I'm not sure, maybe office and some of the some of the retail, perhaps malls that are struggling now. And but now this new fund obviously is going to focus on logistics, data centers, other areas that might be more promising. So it actually doesn't really surprise me. I mean, the kinds of investors, which include individuals and institutions, pension funds, they are looking for outsized returns, and why not target those areas that might be in distress or that where there might be some opportunities, turn them around and make a handsome profit with it. So actually, it's pretty interesting. It's a reflection of a changing market, and it tells me that there are opportunities in those areas, that perhaps there might be some strain and some distress in those areas, and might be ripe for the pickings, and so they're raising the money to do that.
And John, is it safe to say that Blackstone is a market maker?
Well, I mean, the real estate market is much bigger than Blackstone, obviously. Blackstone alone, I don't think is a market maker in real estate, but they're definitely a bellwether. They're seasoned executives. I mean, they're seasoned real estate folks, and they probably sense changes in the markets and opportunities. And it's just an interesting observation.
Interesting. So anybody out there who's listening, remember the industries that Blackstone's going to be focusing on, if you're looking for opportunity, are again the industries of logistics, rental housing, hospitality, lab office, and data center. So let's go to story number 4. We're going to go to Oscar. I'm going to read you the headline. I'll read you the first couple graphs, ask you to comment. And for what it's worth, let me kind of lay it out. The immigration building is what people are used to refer to it at in Miami. It's on 79th and Biscayne. It's effectively downtown Miami goes till about 36th Street. So it's a good 40 blocks or so north of the downtown Miami area, the design district, if you know Miami, Edgewater, Wynwood. So it was located up in this area. It was a tall building, probably ballpark 10 stories, 15-story tall tower. And people used to have to line up there every morning to try to go see an immigration officer. So the lines would just be massive. Everything in and around there was all for services. All the retail space was for services that would basically help the people who were standing in line trying to get into the immigration building. So whenever there was a protest or anything, this was like a focal point. This is an area where you could go and you could basically protest. So that's kind of the background. Let me read you the headline and the first couple graphs, and then you can provide some comment. Headline, Miami Herald, Money Pit, how an overhaul of Miami's former immigration building became an epic disaster. First couple graphs. The building stands empty and skeletal, a behemoth overlooking Biscayne Boulevard and 79th Street. But the old Immigration Naturalization Service Tower at 7880 Biscayne Boulevard was once a bustling swarm of activity with long lines befitting Miami's role as the international hub of migration and overseas travel. For going on 15 years, even as a neighboring Biscayne Boulevard was transformed from a stretch of drab convenience stores and blighted hotels into trendy boutiques and restaurants, the structure has stood like a grim tombstone, even getting tagged with an unsafe structure notice in 2021, despite plans for a sparkling rebirth. Those plans have thus far resulted in an epic failure, with tens of millions of dollars lost in a game of whack-a-mole involving an array of opaque limited liability corporations. That alleged financial sleight of hand has spawned lawsuits, including one filed this past month, claiming fraud and deception. Tangled up in this saga are the hopes of Chinese investors with a dream of coming to the United States with their families, and the frustrations of the town of El Portal, located a few blocks to the north of the empty structure. The story that emerged from court documents is one of financing shenanigans on a grand scale involving something called an EB-5 visa. Anybody doesn't know an EB-5 visa? I'm not an attorney. Check with your attorney. Basically, what it is, it's a program that tries to bring foreign investment into the United States. If somebody gets approval for an EB-5 visa from the United States government, they then can turn around and garner or gather investment from foreign nationals. And if these people were to go ahead and invest, they're not getting real estate, they're providing a financing instrument. If they're able to do that, they will be fast-tracked for effectively a green card and or residency in the United States. So that's the pitch, the EB-5 visa. So Oscar, why don't you give us your take on this particular story and what the significance is of it?
Well, I think it's an anomaly because if you look at Biscayne Boulevard, north of 54 or 62nd, which is what they call the Mimo district now, that building sits right on the edge, and it's had issues. There's no question about that. But the rest of the area has actually seen a lot of investment.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, if in the end it's foreclosed on and it gets flipped, someone else will come in and do something with it because um, the building is well located. So what I think is interesting about that whole story, if you read it, is the issue or the allegations of fraud related to the people who were investing in redeveloping it. Well, redevelopment is probably the wrong word. They were interested in, uh, I think they were interested in overhauling it, right? And, like a lot of Miami, there were big dreams associated with that site, and a lot of people bought into it. And now it's clear that it's going to have to get a new round of people behind it before it becomes something else. But that whole area is a focus of a lot of money that's coming in specifically for the what they call the Mimo hotels, that were made in I think the 50s and the 60s. Um, and the idea is the New Yorker and others have attracted groups that are looking to revitalize those older properties and turn them into, a semblance of what they used to be or a full blown, uh, reconditioning of those properties. So there was just a story I read about another hotel that got new investors, and that's where the restaurant Blue Collar is. And what they plan to do is to, um, you know, make it into a draw for people like the other hotels on Biscayne Boulevard. So it's a very interesting area, and I think it's going to continue to attract investment as properties in other parts of Miami uh, are getting investment. So it's inevitably, I think that building will find a new life.
Interesting. Oscar, just one follow up real quick. Is this an example of the risks people take when they trust an investor? They put money on an investor with nothing there, such as buying pre-construction or investing in one of these EB5s. Is there anything to be learned from it from all the people who are putting down their deposits on some of these proposed condominium towers that are supposedly going up throughout South Florida? Are they different, or is it all one and the same, where basically a developer sells a dream, collects the cash, and whether or not they produce or not is someone else's problem?
So this is a question that I've been ruminating on for years now, is what is the real market of a condominium in Miami, right? Is it the primary buyer or is it the secondary buyer? Because the primary buyer is, like I referred to at the beginning, at the beginning of the podcast, the primary buyer generally is on a friends and family list, and they're the first ones to get in and the first ones to get out. So I wonder if in reality it's the secondary buyer that is really the one that's going to hold on to that unit for a few years. And generally, if you're an investor, you're holding on to a property 2 to 4 years. Does that sound right? 2 to 4 years. So you're looking for a gain that's substantial, not just $10,000 or 40, you want 100 or more. So, um, is it different or the same? I would say that, you know, there's a lot of opportunity in real estate, and it's always based on high risk. And if you're in a building from a known developer, you're facing less risk as long as the market is strong. Once the market starts changing, well, then all bets are off. It could stop completely. So I don't know that we're there. We're seeing some signs of slowdown, but it doesn't mean that there aren't buyers out there. And there are definitely renters. So if you buy a unit, you're going to find a renter, right? And in Miami in particular, there are so many things happening right now, so many events that attract a global population, global visitors, that there's going to be demand for places like these hotels and motels on Biscayne Boulevard, north of 54th Street, because even though they're small, that's not why people come here. They're not going to stay in the room. They're going to be out on the beach, or they're going to be out at clubs, or they're going to be out at the galleries, or they're going to be out at restaurants. So there's opportunity on that strip. And I think that that building at some point will find another life. Now, maybe it's going to require tearing it down. That's possible. It might be a tear down for someone. But right now, it's got a shell that seems to be stable enough that they haven't declared it, a hazard. There's another building on Northeast 2nd Avenue that is similar, that I think was a bank building for many years, and now all the windows have been redone. It was completely stripped. All the windows were redone, and they put in some different size windows, and now it looks like it's ready to lease, to be
Interesting.
residential or office. So we'll see. I mean,
Yeah.
there's definitely opportunity in the market, and I think that building will see another light.
Yeah, interesting point. It could also be viewed as a symbol of the risk involved with investing with some of these projects in South Florida, but
Sure.
that's another discussion. Mr. Fakler, we're going to go to you in story number 6. This is coming out of Travel Weekly. It's an industry publication for the travel industry. Here's the headline and then the first couple graphs, and I want you to comment. Before I do, let me sort of set the scene. Back in the 90s, certain celebrities such as Madonna, they were down here in South Florida. They were here in Miami. You had some guy called Sylvester Stallone. We all remember him from Rambo days. These are some of Rosie O'Donnell, if you remember that name. These are some of the people who were down here. But there was one hotel that always stood out, and that was a hotel that supposedly Madonna used to go to. And it was a hotel that was basically created and run by a guy called Ian Schrager. So that's the background story, Mr. Fakler. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to read you the headline and the first couple graphs, and I want you to comment. Headline: plans are underway to reopen the Delano South Beach. And some of you will say the Delano. Delano. They're both right, and I've never heard anybody convince me one way or another. So I'm going to say the Delano. If you want to say the Delano, go ahead and say it. But send us an email if you have a comment. So plans are underway to reopen the Delano South Beach, and some more. Unveiled new details about its bid to grow the Delano brand, including plans to refurbish and reopen the original Delano South Beach. The group's effort to scale up the Delano flag is being made in a partnership with Kane International, the real estate investment arm of Delano South Beach owners, Eldridge Industries. Opened in 1995, the Delano South Beach at 1685 Collins Avenue, Miami Beach, will undergo a substantial renovation and reopen as the brand's flagship location, according to Ensamora and Kane International. The building, which dates back to 1947, is comprised of 194 rooms. Mr. Flagler, there's plans to basically have 2 different flag operators that are all going to play off of the fact of the success of the Delano or the Delano. What do you make of this? And what do you think the likelihood is that this hotel will be successful with people who maybe are of a certain era, which is probably millennial, rather than those who are boomers and they are Generation X, if you will?
A couple of interesting items in this story. One of them is that these refurbishings began a couple of years ago. Apparently, Miami Beach was one of the few resort areas, or one of the few areas that did not see a drop-off in business during COVID. And this is around that same time. So you had a lot of people planning these refurbishments. What's interesting is more recently, we've heard about the riots and all the problems going on in Miami Beach. So I'm wondering if a lot of these high-end properties are sorry they're coming online, because this is a weird time to be, because we're not, we're going to have to look at Miami Beach. Is it really a high-end resort town anymore after all the problems they had? But those are just the 2 issues. But yeah, so again, I think it's very similar to what's going on with the branding of the residences, the high-end residences. It's the same thing. And Miami's still an international destination. So you see these new properties coming online, these new hotels. I'm sure it'll
Mr.
continue.
Fakler, but my question is this brand from the 90s, is that going to carry any weight in today's world? And if it does, who's the demographic? Is it Generation X? Is it the baby boomers who maybe visited it? Otherwise, a millennial who doesn't know who the hell or what the hell Delano is.
It's a good question. Because I'm one of those. Being a baby boomer myself, it was, when I first came down here and I was in my 30s, it was a sexy idea, this whole idea of the Delano and the branding of these really hot properties. But you're right. I think it really appeals more to a baby boomer than a millennial now, because a lot of people like me are, getting to the age where they're not really, they're not going to clubs, but they may,
No.
they may appreciate the actual branding of the Delano and other historically significant names.
Interesting. And if it doesn't work with the baby boomers, they can always turn it into adult living facility. That would be an easy transition. So with that, we're going to go ahead. We're going to take a commercial break. This is Peter Zalewski of the Condo Vultures podcast. Before I started doing these podcasts, I was in the business of being a licensed real estate broker, a contributing columnist for the Miami Herald, as well as the Miami Real Deal, but also extra witness work in consulting. So if you are looking for an expert witness, or if you're looking for consulting services, a straight talk perspective as to what's going on in a particular marketplace, a building, or what happened previously, for whatever your situation is, whether you are an attorney, whether you are a institutional fund looking to invest, or whether you're a lender who's trying to come up with some sort of strategy and approach for your lending committee going forward, I just might be able to help you. To get a hold of me, please reach out to Peter@CondoVultures.com. That's Peter@CondoVultures.com, or give me a call to the office at 305-865-5859, 305-865-5859. Welcome back to the Miami Reporters Roundtable. I'm your host, Peter Zalewski of Condo Vultures. We took a little bit longer than we had originally scheduled for because of our discussion about various topics this particular week. As a result, we're going to go ahead and we're just going to wind down the podcast. Now we'll pick up one of the stories in a future program. So let me go ahead and thank all of our panelists. I want to thank John Gruss. John was a journalist for 25 years. Right now, he has his own public relations marketing firm called Gruss Communication. You can reach him at GrussPR.com. That's GRUSSPR.com. I also want to thank John Fakler. He was a journalist for 20 years, who wrote about white-collar crime. Right now, he does public relations and marketing. You can get a hold of John at Fakler@consultant.com. That's Fakler @consultant, singular.com. And I also want to thank Oscar Musibay. Oscar was a journalist for over 20 years. Right now, he is a media consultant and expert. If you want to get a hold of Oscar, you can get him at omusibay@gmail.com. That's OMUSIBAY@gmail.com. And I'm Peter Zalewski of Condo Vultures. Let me remind you to, if you have any questions, you have any comments about anything that was discussed, go ahead and send an email to inquiry@CondoVultures.com. That's INQUIRY@CondoVultures.com. And don't forget to check out the actual video component of this podcast. Go to any platform that permits for it, such as Spotify, and you can look us up on YouTube. Our handle is CondoVulturesTV. So until next time, take care of yourself, and we'll catch up soon. Ciao, ciao.
Don't buy a South Florida condo, discounted or distressed, before taking a Condo Vultures correction tour. CondoVultures.com offers weekly bus and walking tours that focus on educating buyers on the how-tos of identifying discounted condos, analyzing the opportunities, and purchasing units. Every tour attendee receives a list of all condo projects in a particular market, a market assessment handout, and unmatched expert analysis. For more information on the condo correction tours, please visit CondoVultures.eventbrite.com.